it sounds benign, but it's actually pretty soul crushing because when God does not take those same-sex desires away, you start questioning your connection with God.
Hello, and welcome to the Sacred Not Sinful Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kevin Jenson, a Bible scholar and sex educator helping Christians find practical ways to integrate faith and sexuality. If you're new, this podcast brings you stories of hope and resources to experience beautiful, intimate, and deeply satisfying connections with God and with others without leaving your faith or your sexuality at the door. Ready to get started? Let's dive into today's episode.
So today I'm excited to welcome onto the podcast a friend of mine, Jon Carl, who I met similar to our first guest at the Wild Goose Festival. So I want to just say welcome, Jon Carl. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and help us know the unique perspective you bring to this conversation?
Okay, I will do that. First, I'm going to embarrass you. I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I followed Kevin before we met at Wild Goose last year. And a couple weeks ago, Wild Goose sent out this letter saying, "Tell us your love stories. Did you fall in love at Wild Goose?" And my immediate thought was, yeah. I wanted to tell Wild Goose about this like bromance I felt with you immediately upon meeting you at Wild Goose. Erotic, but not sexual, which will be fun to talk about a little later. So I'm really glad to be with you. And glad to share some of our connection with the world.
Yes, I'm excited. And I'll just say this is probably not the only interview we'll be doing together because we have a lot to share and have had some just amazing conversations. So again, I'm very grateful to have you here. And thanks for that embarrassing story. All right.
Sure. So, my story. I have been Christian all my life. I was raised in a Christian family. I was raised in a Christian family where my ancestors, several generations before me, had founded the church that I was raised in. Christianity has always been, I've been marinating in the Christ story and in the gospel and in that very liberative, progressive version of Jesus that I didn't realize white evangelicalism shared. I didn't realize white evangelicalism didn't share. So yeah, I was all in for Jesus. The church raised me, and around the 70s, as I was a child, the contemporary Christian music movement was going on. It was coming out of the Jesus movement. And growing up, the Jesus movement looked so exciting. Like all these cross-cultural people remaking the world with love and flowers and hope and God loves you. And the music, and I was getting so sucked into it. And by the time I got to that movement, it was mid-80s, and it was being taken over by the moral majority. So nevertheless, I got some of the really good parts of evangelical fundamentalism. I landed in college, started going to this group that was really tight-knit, Princeton Evangelical Fellowship. Every Friday night, we had a Friday family fellowship, food, guitars, music. We'd sit on the floor and we'd just have a great time, like all night. Had a perfect excuse to not go drink because I didn't drink. Perfect excuse to not date, which was good because I was gay and didn't really want to spend intimate time with women. And that was fine until this group sort of had a reputation. There was a matchmaker in this group, the wife of one of the missionaries. And her mission was to have us paired up and married as soon after graduation as possible, if not before. And so a woman was picked out for me who was a lovely woman. I really, really enjoyed her. I mean, beautiful woman. She died a few years ago, and she was just a beautiful light. And I wasn't in love with her. I was in love with her classmate, who I went jogging with in the woods. We would study together. We would do music together. We would sit and have like long conversations. He was the first guy I fell in love with. He was the first guy who I saw living with the rest of my life. And sex wasn't on the agenda for me at that point. I just wanted to be with this guy for the rest of my life and be friends forever.
Yeah.
We're friends now of a different sort. He has a wife and kids, and that didn't work out for me. But my longing, my erotic longing to be in his company for the rest of my life was so strong. I finally confessed to my advisors that I was experiencing same-sex attraction. I didn't say it was for him because I really didn't want us separated, which they would have done. So I just kept it vague, although any fool could have known who it was. And I went into reparative therapy, which reparative therapy is as simple as sitting with your counselor every week and talking about, how to pray so that the gay goes away. It sounds benign, but it's actually pretty soul crushing, because when God does not take those same-sex desires away, you start questioning your connection with God.
Yeah.
And that's soul death. That's soul death. You don't want anyone questioning their connection with God, not when they're seeking God every day.
Yeah.
And so I got despondent, I got suicidal, graduated from college, started going to a hardcore group in Manhattan, every Friday night, which wasn't fun. I would sit there with, this is the height of the AIDS crisis, by the way, 1987. People are dying right and left. I have every incentive to go straight. And I'm sitting in a room with these gay men who desperately want to be straight. They don't know how to make us straight. Nobody knows how to make gay people straight. That's because it doesn't happen. Even people who said it was happening, you go back and find out they were lying. They didn't know. They didn't know. Nobody knew how to do this. And yet, hanging out with those men, they were creative. They were funny.
Yes.
They had rich, vibrant lives. They were confessing stories. I was like, wow, I wish I had those sins. I mean, dude, I wasn't having sex with anybody. And where I was living, like, nobody was interested in having sex with me. I felt I had been lied to. I was told that homosexual men went roving around in the dark looking for young guys like me to seduce and pull into the bushes and have sex with. And I was like, where are they? Because they're not here. They seem not to be interested in me. What's going on? So I was like, as my second boyfriend said, I was a sexually neglected youth. But what I realized was I did not want to be straight. I was okay with being celibate if it meant that I could minister to the gospel in this gay community, to these people who were dying, who needed Jesus. Yeah. That was my call, I felt. Wow. And my evangelical folks back home weren't having it.
Because you're not allowed to have same-sex attraction and be a minister at the same time?
No, not allowed to do it. And it's funny because even the evangelicals who so called embrace people with same-sex attraction and who don't try to make them marry women and go straight, they're still really sketchy about having them sit in the congregation. They're still really sketchy about having them lead worship. They're not including them in the body of Christ, which is a tragedy.
Wow.
And I was feeling incredibly lonely because the one thing the celibate gay people say is the church needs to be your family. The church will be your family. Jesus will be your boyfriend. If only the church supports you, you can live a celibate life. Well, churches don't support celibate people. They don't support single people who are straight. And I was in a world of pain until God one day said to me, you know, you're working really hard at this. You have sins that I would like to work with you on. And being gay is not one of them. Your focus on being gay is keeping me from doing all the work I want to do with you to grow you in other ways.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is a beautiful moment. So you're in conversation with God and you
Yes.
get a sense that, okay, I'm distracted by this one thing because everybody around me is saying, this is what you have to fix first in order to follow your life journey. And you're in prayer realizing, oh, actually, this is what they think is important. And you're being called into another focus in your life.
Yes.
That is powerful. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. Which, you know, and it was at that point that I started listening to all these scandalous rumors that Episcopalians were okay with gay people. And so, of course, I made a beeline to my Episcopal chaplain on campus and said, I hear you guys are gay friendly. And he said, why, yes, we are. It was new for them. It was exciting. And said, you know, there's a church you want to go to. I started going to Trinity Episcopal Church in Princeton, where I was confirmed as an Episcopalian in 1990. And I was Episcopalian until maybe 5 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I think that's really cool that you were looking around for community, saying, hey, I want to be connected. I want to be part of the church, as opposed to saying, hey, I've been rejected by this one part of the church. I'm just out. You're like, oh, wait, there's a place where I can be in, be connected, be in community. And you went there.
Yes.
How would you say, like, how did that help? How did that contribute to your journey being part of the church community that welcomed you without forcing you to focus entirely on sexuality in order to be able to fit?
Well, I don't know that I would go that far.
Okay.
Episcopalians are notoriously chilly. And going from that emotionally enmeshed evangelical world, which many of us remember, to people who might smile and say hello to you at coffee hour at best, and then let you stand there by yourself. That was a challenge. So what I ended up doing was going deep into personal study. The biblical resources were around, but I did more church history. I did a deep dive into John Boswell. And at that time, John Boswell was very much alive and had just become chairman of the history department at Yale. So, of course, I got myself on a train and went and visited. And he said, we need more queer scholars. There is a lot of history. We have a lot of history that has been covered up. We are present in church history, whether it's the homoeroticism of John of the Cross, or, you know, just Elred of Rievaulx. I mean, just there is this longing for the erotic. In the 1100s, monastic same-sex friendship was the highest form of love. This is when the church was saying, we really prefer that you don't get married to heterosexuals, heterosexually, which is what was going on. That's Paul's thing. That's what Paul was saying.
Yeah.
Heterosexual marriage was not his thing. It was not Jesus's thing. It became the thing because that's what people do, and people like to reproduce. So the church did this workaround and said, okay, it's okay. You know, around 12th century, they decided to bless male-female partnerships officially, but that was not a core Christian agenda. Yeah. So that was really nice. And I thought I would find community in academia, and I didn't. I flunked out of Harvard Divinity School and entered the gay community, where I was singing on the choir, and two boys from church said, "Hey, we got a place for you." They took me to a leather bar in Boston. And that was my community for the rest of my time in Boston. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what you didn't find necessarily in the church, because of theological reasons at first, and then for community reasons second, you actually found in this community that had nothing to do with Christianity.
I'm not sure that it had nothing to do with Christianity. What I've found in the gay community is the people I resonate with. I never resonated at all with the dancing, drinking, drugging, clubbing gay people. They've never really liked me. I've never really had time for them. But these intense, like leather circles, leather folks know how to do ritual. They know how to channel erotic energy. And if you push them, they will talk about the fact that they are connected to the divine in lots of interesting ways.
Wow. So for those of our listeners who don't fully understand what you mean by a leather community, can you give us kind of some idea of what we're talking about?
Wow. There is a subset of the gay community. At that time, it was an all-male community that I hung out with. It's expanded now. It's very inclusive of all genders. But we would dress up in leather jackets, leather pants, leather hats. We would play dress up. We knew it was drag, but we were like, sort of, we didn't like the feathers and the pink and the makeup, and we didn't do that. We did black leather. We did hyper-masculinity, hypersexuality. And because we were a community, and we were a community where people were dying of AIDS, I learned how to communicate around sexual boundaries and sexual expectations from the leather community. We were doing consent decades and decades and decades ago. We were negotiating safe sex from almost the very beginning. And so we learned to communicate openly about sexuality. We learned to communicate openly about ritual. There wasn't a whole lot of communication about our spiritual lives. That was sort of under the radar. But it was suffused with spirituality. I've got a story to tell. I need people to die so I can tell stories about them. I don't know if you know the name Peter Gomes. Peter Gomes was the chaplain of he was the dean of the chapel at Harvard. It is an incredibly well-funded, high-profile position in in the church world. Uh, and he, when I was at Harvard Divinity School, he was getting ready to come out.
Mm.
And I was hanging out with him, and not sexually. He had this other like white boy toy. I won't call his name. But I don't think they were having sex, but the guy lived with him. Um, and so everybody was asking me, is he gay? Is he gay? Is he gay? And I'm like, I don't know. Ask him. Because, at that point, we didn't out people. People had to make that declaration themselves.
Yeah.
Well, of course, Peter was gay. And when he came out, I was like, finally, because I can stop at people asking me this question. Well, we used to have this place called the Rose Garden in Boston where guys would go and be erotic with each other. And I was there hanging out with a few friends one night, and I looked up, and here comes Peter Gomes dressed in full leather with a cohort of men all dressed in full leather like his bodyguards. Dean of the Chapel of Harvard College. He sees me, recognizes me. I had sung in his choir. We had laughed together, and I said, Father Gomes, because I did not expect to see him there. And he said, carry on, my son, and just went sailing off into the night.
Wow. Like, what did that do for you? Like, what was the significance of that moment? Because it sounds like you were almost surprised by seeing him there and then hearing what he said.
You know what that was? That was a blessing.
Yeah.
That was a blessing. That was a direct divine transmission of grace from my spiritual father to me, affirming me as I was in the midst of connecting with my people in a very powerful way.
Mm-hmm.
I see you. You're here in this erotic space, connecting with other men. And here he comes with all the authority of the church and Jesus and looks at me and loves me
Mm-hmm.
and says, carry on, my son.
So at that time, did you feel like you had something of an internal divide between where you were and your way of life, and then the theological background and context that you came from?
Um, the disconnect was a disconnect in community. I think looking back, the disconnect in me was not as great as finding a community that would take both sides of me.
Mm.
I'm struggling with that now. I'm really having a hard time finding a community that can accept both sides of me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I am all in on the Jesus story and Christian community.
Yes.
I am also all in on erotic connections with the divine as expressed in the queer community. And dragging those two together has been a lifelong struggle.
Yeah. I hear that.
Which is why when I run into you at Wild Goose and you were dragging these two together,
Yeah.
I had an immediate erotic but not sexual connection with you, because those of us who are out there insisting that the erotic and the spiritual go together, there aren't a whole lot of us who are public. There are a lot of us who feel this way. There are a lot of us who want these things to be together and don't know how to find support for that.
Yeah.
But our communities refuse to acknowledge that the two can overlap.
So can you talk a little bit more just about this distinction that you make between the erotic and the sexual? So I know for a lot of people, these two are basically synonyms. And here we make a distinction. This is also what you were talking about. I'm still with you in that story back in the park. We were like, I'm in an erotic context and finding this blend of erotic and the spiritual blessing of the erotic. I'm sure some people are like, I have no idea how somebody could bless the erotic. Never heard that erotic was part of historical Christian tradition. Um, and they're also like, does erotic mean that you're naked with somebody, that you're having sexual activity? What does the erotic mean? I guess this is my question for you: is what does the erotic mean to you?
Um, the the erotic and the spiritual for me are two different words for the same thing.
Hmm.
And that is the God impulse to intimacy with something else, something more than the physical, but something that includes the physical in a powerfully intimate way. So I can be erotic with God.
Yeah.
God doesn't have a body. Um, yeah, yeah, God doesn't have a body. Let's say that. Um, I can be erotic with you as you consent, and I can feel God permeating both of our bodies. Um, I can be erotic with you and sexual and still feel God permeating our bodies. Um, the erotic is the spiritual energy that connects. It's love. It draws us towards each other. It draws us into communion, deep communion.
Uh-huh.
And just like the Hebrew Bible homework that I threw together this morning was all about the Psalms.
Mm-hmm.
Just as reciting the Psalms draws you into greater intimacy with God and can draw you into intimacy in community,
Mm-hmm.
having intentional sex is like reciting a psalm. It's a praxis. It is a something we do to channel that energy and express that impulse to be close to a beloved.
That is fascinating. That's really, really interesting. Just kind of that distinction I'm seeing between the erotic and the sexual here. And I'm putting the sexual above because that's part of my taxonomy of touch. But what I'm hearing you talk about is that sexuality, or maybe we talk about this. This is an ongoing philosophical debate that happens in my head
Uh-huh.
as to the
I
nature
love
of,
those debates, by the way.
right?
Yeah.
Because there's a multidimensionality to sexuality that brings in the body, the spirit, the relationships, the psychology. All of it is present in sexuality, which is why I tend to put it above the erotic as perhaps more multidimensional. But
Mm-hmm.
what we're talking about here is sex as part of the erotic. And so instead of saying that sex is love, we're saying the erotic is the energy of love, this draw of connection, and it may find its expression through sex.
Yeah, I firmly believe that sex is a full subset of the erotic.
Wow. Okay, we're
Yeah.
gonna have to go into that at some point. Um, because here we are, right? We're years down the story in our journey.
Yes.
Um, and so let's kind of work our way back to this point in the park where you're still kind of navigating perhaps some questions. How Tell us a bit more about how you came to then this understanding of the erotic that you carry today, where you're like, oh, this is beautiful. This is part of God expression in the world. Did you have that back at that time?
Yeah, I was having that. Um, and I've been skittish about my intellectual development at that point because um, here's what I wanted when I went to seminary. I started seminary at Princeton Theological Seminary. Um, they didn't want gay people there. They had thrown one guy off campus the year before. And when I was applying for readmission, they lost my application
Hmm.
until I applied at Harvard, got in, and then they said, "Oh, well, we had meant to admit you. We just found your application. Sorry, you're leaving."
Hmm.
Um, what I wanted the Christian tradition to give me everything I needed to connect my erotic and my spiritual.
Hmm.
And at that point, the Christian tradition did not give me that. It
Yeah.
gave me glimmers. There were people doing work. Carter Hayward was teaching at Episcopal Divinity School, which no longer exists at that time, and she was teaching about the erotic Christ. She had just come out as a lesbian at that point,
Hmm.
um, and had this theology of Christ as an erotic principle, which is where I'm sure I'm getting a lot of this. I read that then, so I'm sure I stole a lot of this from her. Um, but I fell in with a bunch of Wiccans,
Okay.
and Wiccans at that point were putting together the erotic and the spiritual in tangible ways. That's an important part. Um, I came out of an intellectual tradition, so I was looking for intellectual theological justifications, biblical, scriptural, theological justifications that it was okay.
Yeah.
The Wiccans were saying, um, we're not necessarily going to get you naked and have sex with you to demonstrate these principles, but they were very intentional about embodying spirituality in a way that the Christian tradition wasn't offering me in
Hmm.
my context at that point. And so when I learned how to embody the erotic, invite erotic imagination into my body, invite God into the sex I was having, um, which wasn't a whole lot. And I was very grateful when it did happen. I invited God in every time. Um, and that learning how to invite God into my physical practice and interactions and relationships with each other was something the Wiccans gave me.
Hmm.
And now I can see where to find that in the Christian tradition.
Yeah.
I wish I didn't have to go outside.
Right.
The Taoists have it down. They know it. The Hindus, Tantra, they've got it down. They know it. Hate to say, Buddhists, I don't think are all that good at it. They're in to that mind body dualism, escape the world, get away from the flesh thing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that doesn't work for me anymore.
Wow. So what would you say then, like you found this integration of the erotic, the spiritual outside of Christianity. Now you have found it within Christianity. Where would you direct somebody who is interested in looking for this within Christianity? What would you, or better yet, what was your journey like? How did you find it in Christianity?
Mhm. Let me tell you where I would look now.
Okay.
Um, and maybe we can drop these names in the link. I'm going to write them down as I said them. Michael Bernard Kelly, Patrick Chang, and I'll explain who these people are later. Carter Hayward, who I mentioned.
Right.
Um, the Center for Action and Contemplation will kill me when I say this, but Richard Rohr, if you read his writings, um, after having done body embodied practices, you can see a lot of erotic Christianity in Richard's writings.
Hmm.
He doesn't write about sex, but the erotic is there. And in fact, I'm going to do some writing on that. Um, Unfortunately, you probably won't live for me to get around to it since I take so long to write things. But there is an erotic current running through Richard's writings that I think people feel, and even though it isn't sexual, it's there.
Yeah. No, I would concur. I've seen the same thing. Like I read a biography of Saint Francis of Assisi.
Oh yes, it's all over St. Francis.
Like, so incredibly erotic, but entirely without bringing in what we might call the sexual.
No, and Francis did the celibacy thing. He was a renunciate
Yeah.
and lived back to what we're saying, he lived a full erotic life.
Yeah.
I mean, the way he approached life was just all in, all intimate, all intimacy with God and everything else.
Yeah. Now that is a fascinating trail, one that I haven't deeply explored, but the connection between eroticism connected with celibacy at the same time.
Yes, yes, yes.
Wow.
I completely affirm celibacy as a gift and as a choice, because when freely chosen by a person whose spirit is leading to choose that life,
Mm-hmm.
there's a whole lot of stuff that can happen for you there. If you are forced to choose celibacy, and it's not where spirit is telling you to go,
Mm-hmm.
it can get real perverse real fast, and it can twist you and everybody else you touch.
Wow.
I think it is a powerful, powerful, scary energy, and people need to respect it.
That is fascinating.
Richard Rohr and we talked about celibacy. And I remember him saying to me that some people can do it, and that there were a lot of really unhealthy, suppressed sexual energies in some monastic communities that were not good.
Mm-hmm.
Because he said they've never learned anything about sexuality, and all of a sudden they have these feelings and they don't have language for them. They've not been taught how to deal with it.
Yeah.
They have all this toxic stuff around it. Celibacy needs to be chosen. It needs to be an informed choice. You need to know what you're doing. You need to know why.
Yeah. And I want to have a whole conversation about this at some point in time. I think that would, I've never seen somebody talk about this or like really deeply dive in or explore that connection between celibacy and the erotic at the same time. Wow.
Well, I'm I'm taking church history 2, which means Reformation and following, which I hate because I wanted to take church history 1, which is, Jesus until the Reformation. There was so much stuff going on before 1500 in the church.
Yeah.
Poetry, flourishing, literature, same-sex love, not necessarily genital. There was a lot going on in terms of how do we connect with the divine with all our being.
Yeah.
And then the Protestant Reformation comes along with Enlightenment, and it all goes into our heads, and it's all about proving ourselves right, and it's all about Scripture and nothing else. And we lost something. we gain stuff, but we need to get all the other stuff back and like put them together.
Yes. So here's our lifelong work here ahead of us, unearthing ancient Christianity.
Yeah.
So I wanna bring us back around to your story just a little bit more because I love where you are now, and I'm still kind of curious how you made it through this time period from, hey, I grew up Christian and there was this conflict between Christianity and sexuality. I've seen you've talked about somewhat how you've reconciled with the erotic. Was it a different part of your story to actually bring sexuality into the spiritual experience? Was that its own challenge?
Yeah, it was. It was. Coming out when people are dying from a sexually transmitted disease, um, really messes you up a little bit about sexuality. Not only does it mess you up as an individual, it messes the community up. It messes up society. We're still getting over. No, we're not over. We're not over that crisis sexually.
No.
The AIDS crisis gave the religious right permission to destroy sex education in the schools. We now have abstinence-based sex education in the vast majority of school systems around the country because the radical Christian right said, if you don't let us teach that sex is dangerous, everybody will die of AIDS.
Right. And if you teach them how, they're going to do it.
Yes. Yes. It was an
But
incredible political coup.
I also see this loss of the spiritual dimension of sexuality as contributing deeply to this, because if sex is purely biological and
Yes.
biology leads you to die,
Yes.
then by all means, let's promote life. So we have these two things coming together of what you talked about, the Christian loss of embodiment into this conversation about sexuality. And there's nobody having a benefit from that.
Yeah. Let me talk positively, though, about what got me through that.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to be scandalous, but the truth is a scandal. The gospel is a scandal, let's face it. The erotic is a scandal. That's why people don't want to deal with it.
Yes.
I was always interested in sexual encounters with older men. I was also always attracted to older men who were grounded in their spiritual lives. I feel like I have had initiatory sexual experiences with a number of religious men where it was, I'm an adult, they're an adult. I'm a younger adult, but I'm an adult. I'm choosing this. They're choosing me. It's consensual.
Mm-hmm.
They taught me things about incorporating the spiritual and the sexual through practice, through example, through conscious sexuality. I have never been a get drunk and have sex sort of person.
Mm-hmm.
I have almost every sexual encounter I've had, I was stone cold sober. And so was my partner.
Mm.
That makes a difference. Then you're intentional. Then if you pick the right guys, then you have an older, wiser man not only teaching you the mechanics of sex, but how to treat your partner like a person before, during, and after, how to cuddle afterwards.
Yes.
how to make you breakfast in the morning, how to have a conversation like you're a real person after sex.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I worry because 16-year-olds horny for each other getting off on Grindr and then bouncing are not learning how to be in a nurturing erotic script. Not that everybody needs to be running out and having sex with older men, but I will say this. There have been quite a number of articles I've seen recently in the gay press about younger guys talking about how having sex with older men is teaching them, A, older men have had sex education and they haven't. Older men have experience with how sex works and they haven't.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just sex, it's the whole erotic dance of how to have a pleasurable, intimate experience with someone that honors you, honors them, invites in the divine, leaves you smiling on the way out, and sets you out in the world with a heart full of joy so that you are empowered to do the good work that you want to do in the world. That's what good sex does for you.
I preach. This is amazing. Yeah. Thank you for sharing this.
Yeah.
So you find that a lot of your development then of the integration of sex and spirituality came through experience and relationships with people who had already matured in this way.
Yes, and they don't have to be like decades older than you. I mean, what a 27-year-old knows about sex is light years away from what a 24-year-old knows about sex.
Mm.
What a 35-year-old knows about sex is light years away from a 27-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sex is life. I mean, the more you live intentionally, the more you live fully, the more you live consciously.
Yeah.
So start your meditation practice now. It will only ground you for the rest of your life. But the more conscious you are about life and include sexuality as a part of that life, the better it is.
Mm.
And I'm not saying go out and have sex with everything. I mean, you can be judicious. I mean, you can learn about the erotic without taking your clothes off.
Mm-hmm.
God knows asexual people on the asexual spectrum have rich, full lives. And if you talk to many of those folks, especially with a spiritual bent, especially with a contemplative, mystical bent, they're conscious that they're channeling erotic energy. It's just not rubbing genitals up against each other.
Yeah.
All the time.
So bring us a little bit into some theological background to this. I love how you've spent some time in seminary and how you've taken your personal journey and how it hasn't necessarily been connected to the intellectual per se, but you also have that grounding and that background in theology and church history. How would you talk about this idea of the erotic in terms of people who come from an evangelical tradition or reformed tradition and say, okay, so show me where the Bible supports this, right? What would you say to them, and how would you provide some of that theological grounding to our conversation here?
Well, I find that really interesting because if people come at me and they want a biblical justification for healthy sex, especially homosexuality, I'm going to send them in your direction. I'm going to ask them to watch the film 1946, which you can find at 1946themovie.org or .com, which talks about the fact that homosexuality as a term shows up in the Bible for the first time as in 1946. in German Bibles, in the Luther Bible, the same terms are translated as boy lover. There, before 1946, there's a heavy association with pederasty. Um, uh, Grown men having sex with subordinate boys, which was not necessarily penetration, but that's another history lesson. One of the things that I think they talk about in the film 1946, and this is where I'm coming down on understanding the Bible in terms of sexuality. Leviticus, the prohibitions against homosexuality are embedded in an entire chapter of prohibitions against sex. And every one of those prohibitions is about the abuse of power, the abuse of sexuality. Not anything on that list refers to consensual, loving, self-giving partnering. The Bible has nothing to say about that. The Bible has a lot to say about sexual exploitation. Romans is about sexual exploitation. We forget, and this is where history comes in. This isn't Bible, this isn't theology, this is history. We forget how dangerous, deadly, and uncomfortable sex was for people in the ancient world. Childbirth was deadly for women. When women became Christians and were told they didn't have to marry anybody, it meant they didn't have to die in childbirth. They didn't have to be under the thumb of a man. The nuns, women were flocking, upper class women were flocking to nunneries, to monasteries, because that was the only place they could have an education. They could learn to read. They could sing with their sisters. They didn't have to deal with men.
Right.
They didn't have to get pregnant. Sex wasn't what it is for us now. Sex was bad. Roman men, Greek men could penetrate slaves, unmarried women. Hebrew men could do that too. They reined it a little bit, but men of power could penetrate anything they wanted for their own pleasure, and people without power, poor people, slaves, could not avoid being penetrated by men, psychologically or physically. So when Christianity comes along and says, we're going to free you from all this, people are like, yippee. And that doesn't make sense. And that doesn't make sense anymore in a world with birth control, consensual love, free choice. Doesn't make sense anymore.
Right. Well, I think what I would say is that it still makes sense, but we're in a different cultural paradigm. And so if we're looking to the Bible for a sexual ethic, we have to draw something other than, all right, there was this awful power dynamic here. Let's avoid that. We need something to draw us. Well, what is a healthy expression of these things look like? I'm inserting my opinion.
No, and I'm glad you brought me back to that, because I think I might have been leaving us with the fact that I felt anything goes. I really don't. I spoke at the Q Christian conference. 700 queer Christians who get together every year. It's been going on for 20 years. I had a blast. And someone asked me at the end of my talk on sexual ethics, which you will be able to get on their website in a couple months. They said, well, is there anything that you're categorically against? And I said, yes. Porn is not for developing minds. It is adult entertainment, period, full stop. Not for kids. tends to be destructive for heterosexual males in puberty. Not as bad as they say it is, but it's not really the way, it's not where you want it. It's not where people ought to be getting their sex education, which is why people are watching porn at those ages, because they're not getting sex education.
I was one of them.
Yeah. We'll have to talk about that. That'll be, we'll need to talk about that. However, on the other hand, pornography is the first place that I ever saw a trans male having sex where they were smiling, they were healthy, it was well lit, they weren't dying at the end of a play. Gay erotica is where the only place for a long time you could see two men actually have sex and not die at the end of the movie.
Like of AIDS, or of a culture that didn't accept that?
Well, I mean, when I was growing up, they had to die of AIDS. Earlier they were gay bashed. Remember Brokeback Mountain?
Heard of it.
Okay. Beautiful love story. It has to end with the guy dying of a gay bashing with a tire iron. Getting beat in the head with a tire iron. That's how gay erotic love stories ended until very recently. Now we have these cute gay love stories, but there's no sex. So where do you see two normal looking guys have sex with each other who don't die at the end? Porn's the only place. And if that's the way the culture is going to set things up, maybe we need to let up on what we say about porn. It ain't all good. There are toxic studios. I can name a couple of toxic studios, which I won't on the air. Porn I will not watch from those studios. I will not watch Pornhub. I will not watch free porn. Free porn is exploitative, generally, and they let all sorts of content on there without any safeguards. I think it's toxic. And if you're a young adult without a credit card, porn is also expensive. So you see how our society is really not letting people have the good choices that they could.
Right. So categorically, pornography is one of those areas where like this can be incredibly unhealthy. Were there any other areas that you brought up in that conversation of sexual ethics?
There were, and I don't remember what they were. I am pretty I'm pretty down on what people call cheating. I mean, Jennifer Martin was on before. People involved in polyamorous relationships have developed such amazing communication skills, the healthy ones, and a lot of the healthy ones are Christian ones, and not all of the healthy ones are Christian, but there are a lot of healthy Christian polyamorous around. We need to learn from them how to communicate with our partners, even if we only have one. They've got the chops. They've got the skills.
Yeah.
And so this phenomenon of sneaking around and having sex doesn't tend to create good fruit in people's lives.
Yeah.
Doesn't tend to.
Well, and this is the biblical prohibition on adultery, which is pretty much clear and straightforward across the text, is do not violate that connection, that relationship with another person.
Well, I think you and I understand that passage very differently.
Ah,
Yeah.
well, that's right.
However, the principle that you've just voiced, let's go with that and leave that the nitty gritty to some other time.
Sure. So don't violate relationships is probably where we align.
Yeah, don't violate committed relationships. You are not the only two people having sex. There are a whole bunch of people involved.
So I have two more questions because I want to start to wrap us up here, but I have two more questions I'd like to ask you. And one of them has to do with we talked about a theological foundation with regard to the question of homosexuality. We looked at that a little bit. I'm kind of curious what you would bring into the conversation with regard to eroticism, as we talked about that energy of sexuality. And if you had to, at some point in your story, rationalize that from a theological framework, how did you go about doing that? Or maybe how would you today?
Well, I'll tell you where I wouldn't go. Um, I'm sorry. Song of Solomon, Song of Songs is just a burned over district as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
I'm glad there's an erotic poem in the Bible, but after you have read books and books and books on sexual theology, I never want to see, I never want to read it again. I'm done. I'm done. I'm done.
Yes.
Um, I may give an unsatisfactory answer for this. I realized that I have an aversion to the Psalms that I need to rethink. I'm going to talk with my spiritual director about it because there is this book called the Queer Bible Commentary
Mhm.
that I am being forced to read in my New Testament class, in my Hebrew Bible class, and in theology. They're making me read this stuff. I don't want to. Um, and yet, what I was reading this morning was talking about how the Psalms, so many of them are about the individual heart opening to God in honesty,
Mhm.
in radical, naked, complete honesty, laying the soul bare emotionally and saying, speaking to the divine in such a shockingly intimate and honest way. And if you are acquainted with the erotic is nothing more than that.
Mhm.
So, what I guess I'm saying is young me in a Calvinist setting was not going to turn to the Bible and find permission to have sex or explore the erotic.
Mhm.
Um, when you have a mind body duality and you look into places where you have only been taught to see mind body duality, it's not going to get you there.
Mhm.
What may get you out of there is the Psalms, the mystics.
Mhm.
What may get you out of there is the book of John and the interpenetration that goes on in those texts between God and the Father. I and the Father are one. Um, I am in you. I'm the true vine. That is the language of eroticism,
Mhm.
which a lot of mystics, tap into. And the mystics, yeah. The I need to talk about the Gospel of John though, because we're in Lent and Holy Week is coming up.
Okay.
Um, you may need to cover your ears, Kevin. Um, I love the mysticism of the Gospel of John, and on issues of anti-Semitism, it is so incredibly toxic.
Hmm.
I don't know how I'm going to read the Gospel of John on Good Friday this year.
Well, that is an interesting theological anecdote right there.
Yeah. I've been talking to I've been listening to the other book that I really love is the Jewish Annotated New Testament. My husband saw the book lying on the dining room table as I was reading it, and he was like, Jewish New Testament? How does that work?
Yeah, right.
And I explained to him there are Jewish scholars um, who are New Testament scholars who bring all the riches of rabbinic dialogue and deep understanding of the history of Judaism that Christians do not have.
Mm-hmm.
And they look at these texts and they say, of course, that's what Jesus said. That's exactly what Rabbi Hillel was saying. Of course, that's what Paul said.
Mm.
That's what Rabbi Gamaliel was saying.
Right.
We know those people. We read them. We're in dialogue with them. There is nothing new here that isn't Jewish.
Mm. Now I want to read that book. That sounds very interesting.
It's big. Take your time.
Great.
Yeah. It's also $50.
See, I need an Amazon wish list.
Hey, that goes on the Amazon wish list. The Queer Bible Commentary goes on the Amazon wish list. And there's this like 2-volume history of Christianity that goes on the wish list. They're expensive as hell. And you need those texts. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in there that lay people don't get. We, as people trained in seminary, I don't think you're a seminarian, but we trained in seminary. We need to talk to our congregations about what we learned in seminary.
Yeah.
Whether our denominations like it or not.
So I need to bring us to a close, and I'm going to ask you one final question. And that is, if you were to go back and speak to your younger self, who was starting to experience this tension between faith and sexuality, what would you go back and say?
Mm. What I would say is I would look them in the eye and I would say, you know, in your heart of hearts and in your guts that your body and your sexuality are beautiful, beautiful, special creations that God uses to pour God's energy through to connect with others in the world and to make the world a better place. You know that in your heart of hearts. And at some point, the world is going to start to lie to you and tell you it's not true. So stay connected to God. Maybe you'll pick up a few of those beliefs. If you stay connected to God, the Holy Spirit won't let that evil stuff stick. Focus on God, focus on your connection with the divine, and everything else works out.
That's beautiful. I feel like that is an incredible way to wrap up this conversation. But I want to thank you for being here, for sharing your story, to diving in and taking on some of these tough questions that I've asked, following us on the journey and unpacking all of these interesting ideas. Is there anything else that you would like to say for our audience? And if not, I'll just give them some details on how they can connect with you.
Well, I am always open to connect. I'm in seminary now. I am in a master's program in public ministry. And And Holy Spirit is leading me through a process of how we're going to fix this Christianity thing so that new generations know how much richness is here and how much life there is here. And I'm not sure what that container looks like. I am putting some thoughts together in my Substack. There will be a link. I will be doing some teaching. I will let you know where that is through the link tree. And my link tree will give you ways to find me. You can schedule an appointment to chat or download some stuff I've written. So yeah, if you want to be in touch, I would welcome your being in touch.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for the work that you're doing. And thank you again for being here today. We'll drop the links to connect with Jon Carl in the show notes, and you'll be able to access that from any of the platforms where you're listening. Again, I'm Dr. Kevin Jenson. This is the Sacred Not Sinful Podcast, bringing to you stories of Christians who found a way to integrate faith and sexuality. I hope you've been encouraged today, and I want you to know also, I'm here for you in your process. We're here for you in this process. Don't hesitate to reach out to me or to Jon Carl for support in your journey. I would love to be part of that and to hear your story. And if you're somebody who's had an experience where you found your faith and sexuality at war with each other, and you've taken a journey to bring them together, I'd love to hear from you and invite you to join us also on this podcast. So until next time, I wish you...
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Sacred Not Sinful Podcast. If you resonated with something or have a question that came up, I'd love to hear from you. And if you're ready to take the next step, I invite you to connect with me at discover.courageousintimacy.org. There, you can download my book for free, invite me to speak or facilitate an experience for your community, or simply join me online for a workshop or discussion group. As always, be sure to like, subscribe, and let me know if there's anything I can do to support and celebrate your journey to integrate faith and sexuality. Until next time, I'm Dr. Kevin Jenson, and this has been the Sacred Not Sinful Podcast. Thank you for listening.